And welcome and Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Well, yesterday, if you tuned in yesterday, it was interesting because we found a Rashi that was very difficult to sort of capture as to what the reality was that was going on. And we were talking about a situation where these offerings got mixed up in some way or another. And so, for example, if you had an animal that was dedicated as an olah and it got mixed up with animals that hadn't been dedicated, Rashi said, well, what you do is you sell. And it wasn't clear what you sold to someone who was in need of wanted to voluntarily offer up an olah sacrifice. And it was difficult to understand exactly what animals were you selling. Because you didn't know which was the undedicated animal. And so I tried to do some research on that. And the best I got without an absolutely definitive answer is that I understand is that you would sell both animals. Let's suppose your olah got mixed up with an animal that was a non-designated animal, and you didn't know which of these two animals had been designated as an olah. So what you would do is you would sell these two animals to someone else, who both of them, is my understanding. The language is not clear, but it doesn't make sense any other way because you can't sell the non-dedicated animal unless you sell it. Here we go. In principle, and again, you have to, how you sort this one out wasn't really clear at all, and I still don't have a really clear sense in my mind what you're doing here. So I guess a possibility would be to say, if this is a non-dedicated animal, and I'm familiar with this particular dynamic. So you sell an animal, one of those two animals, to someone who requires an olah and who will take that animal as an olah. And then when you take your animal and you don't know whether this animal, you know that either way, right? These animals are olot. Well, except thinking this through again, it's complicated. So I'm afraid I don't really have a good resolution to this particular problem, and I will have to just hope at some stage we'll get a resolution. So I'm going to start the share now. And let's find out where it is. I thought I had it open up. I will do this again. Hold on a second. 1 second. Try this again, and hopefully I will see it. Okay. And there it is. Well, I have some good news. And the good news is the other little piece, which we were talking about yesterday, where it says, it says lirtzono, which means in some ways to his desire, right? That he should either, that it should be desired on the part of Hashem, but it could also mean, in other words, that he be accepted, or it could also mean according to his desire. The his isn't definitive as to whether the his refers to God or whether it refers to the one who's bringing the offering. So the issue was, what if he's reluctant? And fortunately, I found a Torah Temimah that deals with this, I think, in a satisfactory way. So let's take a look at this. Here it is. Yakriv oto lirtzona. He should offer up the animal according to his wishes, something like that, right? Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Yakriv oto, because it says Yakriv oto, he should offer it up. Melamed shekofin oto. That teaches you that, in fact, the Bet Din can force him to bring it. Uchtiv lirtzono. But it also says lirtzono, according to his will. HaKeitzad. How does this work out? How do you resolve this apparent contradiction? Kofinoto, they force him ad sheomar until he says, Rotze ani, this is what I want to do. So we have this kaf hey here for the Torah Temimah, and let's see what he says here. Let's make sure I've got the right, kaf hey. Let me find it. Here's kaf hey. Lemich shechayav olah. So we are talking about a situation where it's not a situation where it's simply a voluntary offering. Remember the olah, right? There are times when you are obligated, chayav, you're obligated to bring an olah. Remember we said that the olah comes to atone for a violation of a positive commandment, or shlamim, or a shlamim sacrifice. Now, my understanding of a shlamim, that would not be simply a free will offering, but rather an obligatory offering, would have to do quite possibly where where it's here, we're talking about a sacrifice that is by nature a thanksgiving offering, that he's coming to offer thanks for recovering from an illness, or their 4 situations: being released from prison, surviving a land journey, he wasn't attacked by bandits, and I'm trying to think. So I think I've mentioned 3, and what is the 4th? So land journey, sea journey, released from prison, recovering from an illness. They're the 4 situations where he would, by the way, we bench Gomel in the place of bringing an offering, because we can't bring an offering. But those are the 4 situations where what happens. And benching Gomel refers to making a special bracha. When you're called up to the Torah, you're given an aliyah, and after the aliyah, you make a bracha, where you thank God for the good things he does for people who are not deserving, in a sense. Chayavim tovot. And then the congregation responds and basically affirms what you've just done. At any rate, so you're obligated to bring these. This individual is obligated to bring these. Al yedei mash. Okay, kofin oto al yedei mashkon. So they force him, and this is what was very significant, by means of a pledge. In other words, they take some kind of pledge from him. Shemim mashkanim oto. They place a pledge on him. So in other words, there's how can I put it? There's some kind of, and it sounds like this is something that's probably has some financial value to it, or some kind of let's put it this like maybe could I call it a bailment, something like that. Aval hachayav chatat. However, one who is required to bring, who's obligated to bring a sin offering, the asham, and a guilt offering, and later on in this very parsha, it discusses these various kinds of offerings and discusses the various circumstances under which a sin offering or a guilt offering is brought. Ein kofin, they do not force him. Why? Mishum de kevan de lachapara ba'im, because they come specifically for atonement, right? They come, so a chatat comes to atone for a sin that you may have committed, okay? And anasham generally is called a guilt offering, where if you had misused, for example, sacred objects, right? But if he doesn't do this, if he doesn't his sin offering, he is not going to gain kapara. Lo mashhe haba'alim atzmam lahavi. Okay, basically, I believe it means that in general, because it's an opportunity to gain atonement, and the one who's going to bring it is going to want to do that, mashhe means to delay. So haba'alim, the owner of the sacrifice, the one who's going to bring the sacrifice, does not delay themselves from bringing. So that's okay. All right. Golda, if you want to ask your question, you can, but I don't know that in Yizkor that's the same thing. So Golda was asking if it's like pledging money for Yizkor prayers. I see what you're trying to say there.
Yeah, that well, we're not bringing bulls and calves anymore in for the memory of our dear loved one, is to do good deeds or whatever,
Right.
Right.
Well, okay.
But
So
I did have another question about this.
yes.
So the Thanksgiving offering, is that an olah or is
No,
that
it's
a
shlamim.
shalomim?
Shlamim.
Okay.
Shlamim are by nature of a Thanksgiving offering.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
going to get them in the right. I'm keeping track.
I
Thank you.
know it's a big budget. It really is. Okay. So
Okay.
we then said that this is what they do, that they take this pledge and they will not release him from it. It's, as I said, it's like bail, right? And it's placing an obligation on him for him to fulfill his, just like you set bail to make sure that the person returns. And so it's the same kind. It appears to me that it would be a very similar dynamic. Okay. So here we go. This is explaining this, and you'll see that he takes into account what I shared with you yesterday about the very nature of being able to force a person up to a point where he says, well, I voluntarily want to do this. I indeed want this. And he says here, Iyen beKiddushin Nun Aleph. So in the Talmud in Kiddushin, Tractate Kiddushin 50a, Hisbiru b'Gemara. They explain in the Gemara there, Inyan Ritzon b'Kfiyah, this whole subject of free will being forced, right? A forced desire, a forced willingness. Mishum, why? The Anan Sahade. It says we understand or we witness the Nechale Bekapara, because we figure that he really does want some kind of kapara. He does want some kind of atonement. Now, we just said that they don't force him to bring a chatat or an asham, because we say that they're not going. They're going to want to do it themselves. There's no need to do that. They don't want to walk around being not having brought a chatat. So it's something. Even though we said that the olah also comes by way of atonement for a positive, having neglected a positive mitzvah, but there's something intrinsically different between outwardly, in other words, actively committing a sin, right, to actually having done something wrong, as having neglected doing something right. And so that's why there's a dynamic regarding sin offerings, that you don't have to force him, that he's really going to want to do it, because he's kind of crazy if he doesn't. And frankly, if he doesn't, he's going to face the music, because he's not going to gain atonement for having actually committed and violated outright a sin. So I think that's the difference here, that with an olah situation, he might not be so motivated himself out as directly as to a point where we don't have to force him. But we say that in general, as I said yesterday, that we believe that people really do want to do what's right. Underneath it, at the very deepest level, they don't want to do what's wrong. So he's saying nechale bekachpara. He actually prefers, he wants, right? It is an advantage to him to have atonement. Vahabiurhu, and to explain this further, ki be'emet, that in truth, kol ish Yisrael, at least they're going to say this about an Israelite, right? Every Jewish person, rotzeh bepnimiyut nafsho, desires in the inner recesses of his soul, l'kayem mitzvot haTorah, to actually perform the commandments of the Torah. Ella, but sheyitzro mitgaber alav, that his desires have his impulses overcome him. They mitgaber alav means to basically overcome and to be stronger than him. Limnoa hamitzvah, to prevent him from performing the mitzvah. So notice here, we are talking about the positive action, the performance of the mitzvot. Misibat yetzer hakesef kamo hakav. And he says, because of his desire, and this to me, I believe is hakesef, meaning money, as in this case. People think twice about spending money for something that they doesn't necessarily give them immediate pleasure. So give me one moment. I'm going to just do a little something here. Okay. V'lachen kofinoto, and for this reason they force him. Sheyigale da'ato, so that he can reveal his desire, his real will, mimash shetamun b'pniyut nafsho, from where it is hidden, okay, buried in the inner recesses of his soul. And remember, I mentioned the Rambam, Maimonides. He says, the Iyain Rambam. This is where Maimonides says it. In Maimonides, Sof Perek, I would imagine, Bet, the last part of chapter 2, Migirushin, in his Mishnah Torah, he talks about the laws of divorce. Remember, I mentioned how this can be used in the case of divorce, Be'inyan zeh, in this matter. And the point is that when the man divorces his wife, he has to pay her ketubah, and he doesn't want to pay it. He doesn't want to cough up the money. So this is a case where we say, well, really and truly, he does want to cough up the money. It's just that his Yetzer Hara is overcoming him. So we need to remove the Yetzer Hara by finding ways to force him. So what we can do is, partly the mashkon is going to involve money again. So there we go. Okay. All right. Let me finish this up, Lisa, and then please bring up the issue you just mentioned in the chat. Ach l'chorah. However, apparently, eino mevuar. Okay, it's not so clear. Menale haGemara, where the Gemara derives. From where does the Gemara get lefaresh yakriv oto bal korcho, to interpret this word yakriv oto? He should bring it, these words in our sentence, right, in our verse, but ba'al korcho, that means even if he doesn't want to do it, against his will. Vidilma, and it's possible, chadma marhu, it's just simply saying one thing, yakriv oto lirtzono, that he should bring it willingly. That's all it means. He should, when he brings it, he should bring it willingly. Rak lirtzono, and only if he's bringing it willingly. He shouldn't. He doesn't. If he's not in a situation where he is in need of bringing an olah, this is all that we're really talking about. That regardless, it has to be brought with free will. V'yesh lomar, and one could say, mishum, if that were the case, to imkain haita kavanat hakatuv, that were that in fact the intention of this verse, hava leilichtov, it should have been written differently. This verse should have been written differently if all it meant was if he is willing to do it. Lehefech, it should be written the different way round. It should have written as lirtzono yakrivoto. The lirtzono should have come first. That is, willingly he should bring it. Dechein derech hakatuv, because it is the way of Scripture. Lichtov davar ha'ikar batchila, to write the main point to begin with. And there we have it. There we have it. So. Oh, yes. Okay, so I'm thinking possibly we'll take a look at this. Lirtzono, Amar Shmuel, said Shmuel, Ola Sricha Da'at. You have to be conscious, right? You have to do this in a conscious kind of way. You can't just do this in a haphazard or without knowing what you're really doing. It requires dot, it requires knowledge. Shene'emar li'tzono, as it says, willingly, according to his will. My kamashmalan. So what is this really trying to teach us? Taninan, okay, it says, right, and generally Tanina refers to, as I said, some source of Mishnaic origin. Ein mitkaper lo ad sheyitratzeh. He is, this is what we learned up here, right? Sorry, it says ad sheyitratzeh. Here, the one above. Ein mitkaper lo ad sheyitratzeh. So we learned that in Arachin. Okay, so it cannot serve as atonement until it is desired, until it becomes desirable. Lo tzricha defari. Okay, and he's saying that it already says that. In other words, it's already telling us. So why do we need this special statement that it requires intention? Okay, he says Lord Siricha. The reason you need it, okay, the farish le chavere, for a situation where his friend knew this person needed to bring an olah, and his friend gave one of his animals, decided to bring one of his own animals as an olah, and not have him, sort of do him this favor by setting aside an animal for him. Mahu de tema. You might think, right, ki ba'enan da'at mididei, that we only require himself, right, to be aware of what he's doing. In other words, it's only necessary for the friend to bring the olah, in a conscious way. Avamadi chavre la, but from his fellow, no. In other words, that only as here there are two people involved in this, and the one who's actually bringing it, we're saying, you might think, is the only one who needs to be conscious of it. Lo kamashmalan. For that reason, we have to understand that he is going to have to tell his friend that he is bringing this olah on his behalf. Let's take a look at the Torah Temimah here. Here we are. Kavchet. Ritzono lomar. So what is he trying to say? Kagon shahaya echad chayav olah, in a situation where one person is obligated to bring an olah, uva v'chavero, and his friend comes, v'hifrisha mishalo, and he sets aside from his own animals, his friend's animals, he, the friend, sets aside his own l'chaparato shel zeh, for the atonement of this other one. The ka'amar, and what it's telling us, deba'enan sheyodia et hamekaper, that this friend needs to tell the one who requires atonement. V'harvutahi, and the main point that's being made here, mishum delefamim, because there are times, lo nechale la'adam, that again, this nechale, it's not something desirable. A person doesn't want lehit kaper, to gain atonement, b'davar she'eino shelo, with something that doesn't belong to him. That he's sensitive about these things. So the friend has to tell him. In other words, this whole action of bringing olah must be done in a mindful and intentional kind of way. And with this, I'm going to stop the share and welcome further comments. Okay. Lisa, do you want to bring up your point?
No, thanks. I just made it.
Okay. All right. Shabbat shalom. David, Shabbat shalom. Any other comments on this? Or was this confusing? Do you need to?
I have one more comment.
Okay.
It kind of sounds like there's this provision that it's okay for someone else to pay someone to do their sentence for a crime. Like if you would try to pay someone to go to jail for you for the 5 years that you need to go to jail for, it's just kind of
Okay,
brought that thought to my mind.
so let's clarify this. Okay, okay, remember they haven't committed a crime for an olah. Okay, they have failed to do something. That's what's happened here. The other point is, if someone is if someone is set bail, can you bail them? Are you allowed to come up with your own money?
Yeah,
Or-
but just not to serve their sentence.
No, that's right. Okay, and you're right.
We're not
In this case,
we are recording still. We're
Yeah.
recording. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not. It's not setting their sentence. What it's doing is somebody has failed to do something, and on top of whatever else they may need to do to make up for it, they're given an opportunity to bring in olah, to make it right with God. And a friend is doing this for another friend. It's a loving act. And because it's not that they're serving their jail time for them, it's that there is a fine being imposed, so to speak. You can look at this as you can look at it as in other ways as well. But in a way, you can say that a friend is helping his friend out, but he has to tell his friend that that's what he's doing. Okay, that's the point of the comment.
That's my point. That's my point right there. If somebody, gets bailed out, for drunk driving.
This isn't a crime in the normal sense, where someone has committed a crime. That's an active act of some sort of wrongdoing, where you've actively done something wrong. Okay, here you failed to do something that you're supposed to do. You didn't lulav and etrog on Sukkos.
But it was some.
You didn't perform a positive mitzvah.
You forgot to light the Shabbos candles.
Yeah.
You realize it's after Shabbos and you can't.
Right. Of course, the example itself is rabbinic, so that wouldn't count. It would have to be a biblical commandment, just to be didactic.
Okay. Well, and I also had another thing about the giving a get thing.
Yes.
That you had beat the guy until he gave her a get, and
well, you wouldn't actually beat him. Yeah.
Wait a second. We talked about this.
Yes.
I'm talking now.
Go on.
And I was thinking of something that could be dangerous for a woman if a man was beaten until he, gave her a get, and people thought, oh, well, that's willingly. But then, not immediately, but like 5 years later, 10 years later, he kills her. I mean, from the consequences of those actions. So anyway, that's what I was meaning by my comment of, things that people do in the name of their God because of how they're perceiving that they're righteous.
So I'm trying to sort of apply this to the situation that we're talking about here, where the justification or the rationale for doing this is a belief in basic human decency, at least on the part of Israelites. If you want to be somewhat, how can I put it, narrow about that application.
You don't want to get into the West Bank right now, do you? Because there is that does that. And the whole situation in Israel with taking land that they think is theirs, and because God gave it to us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Well,
and I'm also talking about Israelites because we're talking about a get also. So I'm not talking about just anybody. I'm kind of relating it to myself.
Yeah.
And we could talk about that at a different time.
Right. This is clearly a deep subject. We're not going to take care of it. I would have to, this is really the subject of a doctoral dissertation, to say the least.
Yeah.
And the issues of how does culture, the general culture, and how people are affected by their general culture. I think there's a lot of evidence of that going on right now in our lives, in the way people are behaving. And I think that, where the general culture leads towards not being violent, and trying to, that where people in general are trying to do the best they can, et cetera, et cetera. You know, some of these things work. I know just to try and mention this briefly, there's a situation, this very unusual situation that's mentioned in the book of Numbers of the Sotah. And this is the situation of a woman who is suspected of adultery. And that they would give her water to test her. So this was a trial by ordeal, which is very unusual. It's the only case that I'm aware of where the Torah mandates the notion of a trial by ordeal. It's not ordeal in the sense of dunking her in the pond and causing her to drown, but there's a lot of psychology involved here, because she just has to drink this water, but this water carries with it the potential of a curse. Okay. They stopped doing it. I mean, this is mentioned in the Talmud, that they stopped doing it because sadly, the promiscuity got to such a point that they'd be constantly doing this, giving this water. And so I think that's indicative of the fact that the culture changed the circumstances by which this law could be applied regarding the law of the Sotah. So I think that applies to what we're talking about here, where they can force a person because in general, they were living in a society where people wanted to uphold the mitzvot, where there was a desire to uphold mitzvot. We are not living in such a society in general at this point, clearly, right? So we have to look at what other alternatives we have in which to try and promote justice and equity to human beings. It becomes a different kind of circumstance. So, okay. Shabbat Shalom, and we're going to stop the recording.
Okay.
And thank you.